Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da. You were saying?
Welcome to episode 156 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. Tonight, as always, I am joined by Darren, the most awesome Civil War nerd I know. And I'm his co-host, Mary, who cannot do an intro to save my life. I was trying to come up with something clever today because we're talking about spies, like you being some kind of international man of mystery when you go to Canada and stuff. But Anyway, so I went with the old standby, the boring, most awesome Civil War nerd I know intro.
Well, that was great. That was fantastic. I was up all night long waiting for that one, but thanks for nothing. And what's going on with you? What's happening?
I'm much happy to be back recording with you. How are you doing?
Good. It feels like it's been a while since we did this. It really hasn't been.
No, it's only been a couple weeks. What are you drinking tonight?
Oh, wow. Getting right into it.
Yep.
I'm drinking the Pennsylvania Nectar of the Gods called Yingling, because I have that. And I'm drinking out of my Mary Surratt coffee mug because we're talking about female spies and female intrigue, and, well, that's the best I can do. So that's what I got. What about you? What are you drinking tonight, Mary?
I'm drinking exactly what you're drinking tonight.
Yeah, it's my Yingling, by the way, but it's okay.
Well, thank you for letting me have a can of it.
Okay, well.
Much appreciated. And I'm drinking it out of my General Grant mug, even though he doesn't really have anything to do with tonight's episode. It's the first mug I grabbed because we don't have another mug with a Civil War female on it, which we should probably change that.
That's fine.
Actually, no, wait. I have a Sarah Edmonds mug somewhere, but I think it's still packed away, so I need to dig that out.
All right, well,
because she was a soldier as well as a spy, so that's pretty cool.
But as you were sort of saying, Mary, tonight we're going to crawl back into that seedy world of Civil War espionage and talk about two Virginia women who made a name for themselves by becoming loyal spies for the Confederacy, and specifically for Jeb Stuart and more famously for John Mosby. These two young cousins became instrumental parts of rebel activity in Fairfax County, Virginia, and would both see moments of true sadness in their lives after becoming heroines in Southern lore. This, of course, is Laura Ratcliffe and Antonia Ford.
Yep, and they were both very interesting women. You can still actually, if you go to Fairfax today, you can see a lot of John Mosby stuff, but you can also see a lot of places associated with, especially with Antonia Ford. Like when you and I were there with one of our friends who lives in the area, we went into this, what is now a lawyer's office, which is apparently where I think Antonia Ford, I think that was her house, right?
Yes,
And there's a sign outside that says that. But you can go to these places where these women were. And as Darren said, they both have connections to Jeb Stuart. He wrote them some pretty cringeworthy poetry. Apparently he was doing that with a few different ladies, which I'm sure we will touch on tonight. But still, this is, Civil War spies are always intriguing, interesting, and we're going to talk about two that don't get talked about too much.
That's right. But before we get too deep into their stories, Mary, it's important to remember the role of women in this Victorian era and how the Civil War would ultimately change how women lived, and saw their roles going forward. And in much of America, especially the South, most of society lived in rural areas on farms, raising livestock, crops, etc. But it's a world where men worked the farm while women managed the household, raised the children, cooked, etc. Women never left the house without a male escort and were expected to keep their mouths shut and never speak their minds. The good old days.
But we're not going to get hit over that one.
No, but the war changed this concept as men would go off to fight, and now it was the job of women to do everything, including protecting their homes from foragers, on both sides. And women had to learn to take care of themselves, and it opened the door to allow them to really, assert their opinions and individuality, which was sort of the first American sexual revolution and pushed women out of that Victorian era mentality. And both Ratcliffe and Ford lived in Fairfax County, Virginia, which, like many places, placed citizens in the crosshairs of the war, especially at the beginning. And, though having just a few main battles, specifically the Battle of Chantilly on September 1st of 62, earlier the Battle of Drainesville on December 20th of 61, Fairfax County would seek skirmishes, and they would see skirmishes and basically activities throughout the war, primarily since it was just about 16 miles from Washington as the Chantilly drives. but for that reason, civilians remained in that constant state of alarm. During the summer of 1861, due to that proximity of Washington, Fairfax was a perfect place for rebel espionage, especially for a young 22-year-old girl named Antonia Ford.
And Antonia Ford, just for some background on her, she was born on July 23rd, 1838 in Fairfax, Virginia. She's the daughter of Edward Rudolph Ford, who was a wealthy merchant, and her mother was Julia F. Ford. Ford would attend Buckingham Female Collegiate Institute in Buckingham, Virginia. So a collegiate institute is, in the United States, it's similar to a post-secondary education. So think of it like college. The term isn't really used anymore, except in Canada, especially the province of Ontario. Just a side note, I went to a collegiate institute for high school.
I thought you went to Andover School of Trucking.
I went to GDCI, which we affectionately called Goddard's District Collection of Idiots.
You said it on me.
Yep. So Antonia is just 23 years old when the Civil War begins. And her father is a hardcore secessionist. So she is growing up in this family that is very Southern, very secessionist. And yes, it is going to have an impact on her, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, both Edward and, and Antonia, they were both especially Antonia was very well educated by many accounts. And by many accounts, she was extremely attractive. To me, she looks like the actress Natalie Portman.
Yeah.
That's who she looks like. But she's going to graduate with a Mistress of English Literature degree from that school you mentioned, the Buckingham Female Collegiate Institute. She was smart, she was attractive, and just like her dad, she was extremely supportive of the Southern cause and would do anything to help it. And, a few days before what would be the first Battle of Manassas, Ford learned from Union officers that feds had sniffed out where P.G.T. Beauregard's Confederate battle lines were laid out, and knew where the rebel weak spots were. So she'll learn that the Federals will plan to attack that rebel left above the stone bridge, and reportedly passed along that info to Union troops that had possibly had Confederate flags to confuse the Rebs during the attack. And this story is attributed to First Manassas, but I've also heard it attributed to Second Manassas.
That's where I've heard it attributed to. And I think it's important to mention that when you're studying these spies, no matter who it is, male or female, there's often different versions of the same story, be it in a different year or a different battle. Like this one, is it First Manassas or Second Manassas? It's not 100% known. But again, that goes back to the life they had for spying. We don't really know much about what they did, what kind of information they brought back. And that's why some of it is... you have to take it, I guess, with a grain of salt.
You elbow from your Manassas. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? But Ford is going to borrow a neighbor's horse on the night of July 19th of 1861 and ride around the Federal troops to a Confederate camp to warn Beauregard of these Union plans. And what's funny is at first that the Rebs thought she was a Yankee spy, so they arrested her and held her for 24 hours before releasing her back to Fairfax. But soon, though, they're going to corroborate her information with some other sources, and using her intel, it's going to change that Confederate strategy to drive back the oncoming Federal troops and win the first Battle of Manassas. I mean, it's not as simple as that, but it was a big part of it. But that story of Antonia Ford's ride around those Union troops to Beauregard's headquarters will become a sensation in the South. It was also reported in the North. Now, the Washington Star newspaper wrote of Antonia's ride, quote, "The hamlet swarmed with officers close to the fighting, but far enough removed from it to be easily susceptible to the charm and tact of a brilliant Southern girl." Harper's Weekly actually published a drawing of Ford's ride, and Ford quickly became a favorite Confederate of the officers in Fairfax. She was a legend. So one officer she became quite friendly with was General Jeb Stuart, who made his headquarters from fall of 1861 to spring of 1862 on Ox Road in Fairfax at a camp he called Camp Qui Vive, which is French for beware of the clown. No, it's actually French for who goes there.
Remember we were trying to figure out what that meant when we were touring the area of Gentilly. We were like, what was the French name for that? Another thing to mention about Antonia, too, is she already does have this connection with Jeb Stuart, and it's her brother Charles, who is going to serve on Jeb Stuart's cavalry during the Civil War. And this is another way which she becomes acquainted with him. And Antonia, obviously, like you said it, she becomes very popular with these Confederate officers. And that's because of her, she's a very pretty girl, but I think she's probably also very well spoken because of her education as well.
Yeah. So by the fall of 1861, The Ford home is on 3977 Chainbridge Road in Union-occupied Fairfax Courthouse. It was used to board and house Union troops as they moved through that Union-occupied town. So with federal soldiers in her home, I mean, you can only imagine how easy it was for this young and pretty and smart Antonia to flirt with them and gain valuable intel for the Rebs. And that info that Ford got was relayed to Stuart at his camp to show his appreciation. Jeb will give her an honorary aide to camp military commission written and signed by Jeb Stuart. Now, again, this wasn't a real commission. Obviously, it was honorary and given as a thank you, but it isn't real, kind of like when someone gives an honorary title to a major. I mean, it's kind of the same thing.
It's kind of like Captain Crunch.
There you go, right? But March of 1862, now Jeb is going to move his headquarters from Fairfax about 7 miles west of the town of Centerville, where Union troops, now commanded by General George McClellan, he'll begin what will be known as that Peninsula Campaign. And again, Jeb will also say goodbye to Laura Ratcliffe before he moves out. But we'll get to her story here in a little while. But as Union troops continued to move in and around Fairfax Courthouse in the spring of 1862, one of the Union officers who would visit was Captain Joseph Clapp Willard, a blue blood Yankee from Westminster, Vermont, which is about 100 miles northwest of Boston, is where it was.
All I could think of was when I read his middle name was like, avoid the clap, Jimmy Dugan.
That's probably where it came from, if you think about it. But Willard was the grandson of Joseph Willard, a Revolutionary War veteran who was part of Hoisington's Rangers in present-day Vermont. Joseph C. Willard and his brother Henry were owners of the Willard Hotel in Washington and joined the Civil War out of pure patriotism as a captain in April of 1862, arriving in Fairfax on April 9th during what he described as, quote, a strong April snowstorm. There you go. But Willard, like many traveling Union soldiers, boarded at the Ford house where he would first meet the 24-year-old Antonia, 18 years old, his younger. So also, speaking of time frame, in April of 1862, it's important for the story too, the Confederate Congress passed the Partisan Act, which provides, quote, that such partisan rangers, after being regularly received into service, shall be entitled to the same pay, rations, and quarters during their term of service and be subject to the same regulations as other soldiers. So again, jump ahead to December 29th of 1862, when Stuart's going to pay a visit to Ford's cousin, Laura Ratcliffe, who said to him, quote, "It is a shame you can't stay long. It's hard for us living in conquered territory." We'll get to Laura in a little bit, but Jeb's going to respond to her, "I won't leave you entirely, Miss Ratcliffe. I mean to leave behind Captain Mosby with a few men to look after the loyal Confederate people here until we can return in force and victory." Mosby had requested to Jeb earlier that, hey, since this Partisan Act was official, can I be one? Can I command a group? That conversation that Stuart had with Ratcliffe, which he was present at, Mosby, I mean, was how he learned that his request had been approved. So the next day on December 30th, Stuart will formally give Mosby command of the 43rd Virginia Partisan Rangers at the Ockham House in Loudoun County. We visited that day.
Yep.
Right?
Yep,
Laid
we've been there.
Laid on the bench. Right?
Yep.
And again, Mosby would then patrol and terrorize Fairfax County from that point forward. But here's when Antonia Ford re-enters this story now. In March of 1863, Fairfax County was firmly held behind Union lines. There were 2,500 Union soldiers that were camped nearby, and they had a telegraph tent that was set up on the grounds of the courthouse right downtown.
Yep.
Fairfax mansions were also taken by Union officers to their headquarters. 24-year-old General Edwin Stoughton, he was the youngest general in the Union Army, and he was commander of the 2nd Vermont Brigade, was staying in a home of Dr. William Gunnell. And when he basically arrived, he famously said, quote, "Fairfax Courthouse reminded me of a hog yard. Everything was so dirty." He must have been on Richardson Drive. But Colonel Percy Wyndham from England, he commanded the 1st New Jersey Cavalry and was staying at the Moore House, which was the home of Thomas and Francis Murray, who again were also staunch secessionists. Wyndham had been a cramp in Mosby's junk and pissed him off badly when he referred to Mosby as nothing more than a horse thief.
Yeah, can you imagine saying that about him, like that must have really gone right through Mosby.
Well, Wyndham was a British. I mean, the thing about
Yeah,
it,
he was kind of I won't say anymore.
But Mosby hated Wyndham and wanted to bag him bad. And he got his chance when a Union deserter named James Ames from the 5th New York, he was fed up with Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. He joined Mosby's Rangers and told him exactly where Wyndham was staying in Fairfax. Now again, the night of Mosby's raid into Fairfax on March 8th, Stoughton was at Ford's house at a party that he threw for in his mother's honor, who was visiting Fairfax that night. Stoughton by then had become very friendly with Antonia. Remember, he was only 24.
Yeah, like, and by very friendly, like there was rumors going around that they were more than just friends.
They thought they were practicing nighttime flanking maneuvers.
Ew.
You know, but there was a lot of gossip in town between Antonia and Stoughton. But little did Mosby know that Colonel Wyndham, the target of this raid, had left Fairfax earlier in the day to return to Washington. But knowing he had a chance to capture a Union general, Edwin Stoughton, he became a worthy consolation prize, is what it was. So what happens after the party, Stoughton's going to go home. He's going to go back to the Gunnell house, and he's going to go to sleep. We're not going to go into the whole story of the details of this.
If you like the details of it, listen to our episode about John Mosby.
That's right. But Mosby snuck into the house, and he captured Stoughton in his bed, along with 2 other Union officers, not in the same bed, by the way.
He, quote-unquote, spanks him with his sword.
He also captures 30 Union soldiers and 58 horses in town before escaping without a trace. Now, Mosby didn't get Wyndham that night, but he probably was happy to learn that in January of 1879, Mary, Wyndham died. You know how he died?
No.
He flew up in a hot air balloon that he built himself, which exploded 500 feet in the air, and he fell all the way to the ground to his death. That's how Percy Wyndham died.
That sucks.
Yeah, he proved gravity the hard way.
Oh, God.
But when word of Mosby's Fairfax raid reached Washington, despite Lincoln saying, quote, "I can make generals, but I can't make horses," Edwin Stanton was livid and wanted to know how Mosby could possibly sneak into Fairfax, a Union-held town with 2,500 soldiers, and capture him barely without a shot.
Yeah, and that's when Lafayette C. Baker goes into the investigation, and he immediately focuses it on Antonia Ford.
Well, the Ford family.
Yeah, the Ford family. Like Stoughton's mother, sister, and 3 of his aides had stayed at Ford's home. And again, going back to what you said, Stoughton is said to have socialized with Ford. On March 14th, 1863, an anonymous letter appears in the New York Times accusing the general and Ford of having been, quote unquote, very intimate. The writer also claimed that if he, Stoughton, gets picked up some night, he may thank her for it.
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
Because apparently he was also running his mouth, too.
But what's going to happen? They're going to ultimately try to figure what's going on. They knew Edward was pro-secession, and rumors of Antonia's intelligence to Beauregard at first Manassas was there, so it made them targets. So they decided first to arrest Edward, that they're going to put him in jail first, and then they needed to find evidence to use against Antonia.
Yeah.
So here's what they came up with, which is a really, really good idea. They sent a spy of their own to the Ford house, a woman named Frances Jameson, who went by the alias Frankie Abel. Abel pretended to be a Southern belle from Mississippi who was stranded behind Union lines, and they dressed her in a faded and dirty Southern clothes to sell it. She was hoping to stay with the Fords until she could gain a pass to return home to Mississippi. And Frankie, again, was welcomed, and Antonia and her became close friends. Mm-hmm. And so Antonia starts to run her mouth now. She starts telling her these stories of conversations she's had with Stuart, Mosby, the Confederates, all of them.
The Rosewoods Clown.
The Rosewoods Clown, probably. All of which Abel passed along to the Union authorities.
And she's even said to have showed the letter that she got from Jeb.
And that was the smoking gun. That letter that Jeb gave to, remember that aide-de-camp, that military commission we talked about that was signed by Jeb, she shows it to Frankie. And Antonia proudly shows it off to her. And once Frankie saw the commission signed by Stuart, as well as the other incriminating Confederate documents, the Union troops showed up. They arrested Antonia on March 15th, and off she went to the old Capitol Prison in Washington, courtesy of her escorting captor, Captain Joseph C. Willard. Mm-hmm. Now, life at the old Capitol Prison, Mary, was brutal, horrible, dirty conditions, crappy food, endless replays of Buffalo Bills playoff games they had to watch over on an endless loop. But Ford stayed at the prison for about 2 months before being transferred to City Point, Virginia, where she was exchanged. And from there, Ford's going to spend the rest of the summer of 1863 in Culpeper, Virginia, where she wrote a letter to her father describing a, quote, handsome visitor in a Union uniform, which of course was Willard. Willard and Ford had become quite fond of each other, and while they were at the old Capitol prison, where one was basically her captor and the other was his prisoner.
Yeah.
It's kind of how it was, not directly, but sort of. Willard is going to request a transfer to the division of the Rappahannock in the military district of Washington around this time, which covered where? The old Capitol prison.
Yeah.
September of 1863. Antonia, what's going to happen? She's going to get herself arrested again.
Yep, she gets arrested a second time and thrown back in the old Capitol prison. Now, something interesting is Antonia doesn't really write about her time in the old Capitol prison, but we do know people who did, and that's, why Darren was able to describe that the conditions are not the greatest there. But this prison also held other Confederate spies as well, including Belle Boyd and Rose Greenhow.
Mm-hmm. It was kind of the holding pen. There was no question. And eventually Mary Surratt's going to be in there. A couple of years later. But what's going to happen is Antonia and her father, Edward, are going to basically each sign the U.S. Oath of Allegiance, and they're going to be allowed to return home to Fairfax.
And she was reluctant to sign it.
Yeah. But who do you think the Union officer was who requested a pass to bring her home?
It was Willard.
It was Willard. Once Willard returned to Washington from dropping Antonia off, their letters back and forth became hot and heavy.
Yeah, and she wants him to renounce his Union Army commission, and he's also married at the time, which complicates it. And he doesn't love the wife, but he also doesn't want to get divorced. And she writes him, Major, I love you, but my parents and relatives would be mortified to death. Acquaintances would disown me. It would be illegal, and above all, it would be wrong. I would make you the luckiest man in the world if I could without compromising myself. You asked for my heart and hand. The heart is yours already. When your hand is free and you can claim mine before the world, then that also is yours.
Yeah, as Meatloaf once said, I'll do anything, but I won't do that. Yeah. But before that, though, I found some of their letters before that. It's incredible. I mean, the ones that she writes to him, she's going to write, and this is all quotes now. This is back when they first started dating. Quote, I bid you adieu until the candles are lit in the parlor and the stars are in the cold wintry sky. I send you my hair...
Oh, God.
According to promise.
Well, actually, apparently that was a thing.
Okay. I've charmed it to warm the sunshine in your life. Now, Willard is going to visit Ford regularly in Fairfax. So when he left, he's going to quickly get another letter. And this letter, this one can write. Quote, each spot recalls you. The sofa you sat on when you said you loved me. My sole ambition is to reign queen of hearts over you. My pupil, no graduating will be allowed until the longer you study, the less probability of this school closing. Dirty girl, holy moly.
Apparently going to a collegiate institute will make you into quite the writer.
But when Willard comes to Fairfax, it meant that he had to ride through Mosby country. So he risked capture. And at some point, their conversation must have come up because she jokingly wrote about this. And Tony's going to write to Joseph, quote, I should want to behead Mosby if he should capture you. Isn't that harsh talk from someone to be considered a Confederate heroine? If it was written today, it'd be LOL at the end.
Yeah, LOL.
Yeah. But in truth, Ford and Willard were complete opposites politically. And by this point, Ford was 25 and Willard was 43. And again, like you said a little while ago, despite their politics, the other issue, of course, was that Joseph was married.
Yep.
And it's funny because to get around this, Willard, he suggests that they should try something called a, quote, private marriage.
Yeah, he wanted to just basically elope.
Well, not that's all. It means like sacking, shacking. That's what it means. Yeah. It means basically living in sin. But again, Antonia wasn't going to have it, and she's a strong, independent woman. Because of the war, and despite her age, she was afraid of those ramifications. Like you said before. She mentioned that letter you just read. She'd be mortified. It was illegal. She couldn't do it. But she dumped him. And a quote you wrote, when your hand is free, you can claim my hand for the world. That's a nice quote. But she's going to drop him like a bad habit at this point. And Tony will actually write him asking if he would burn all of her letters. But these letters I wrote I found in the Library of Congress, so he didn't burn them, so they're there. Now step in here to Antonia's mother, Julia, who wrote Willard saying that how heartbroken Antonia was, and he needs to come back to Fairfax. Now again, Ford's parents are hardcore secessionists.
Yeah.
Somehow he won them over, and they earned the respect of these deep secesh Ford family. So in late January of 1864, Willard is going to show up at the Ford house, and he and Antonia are going to get back together again. Who knows? But now, 2 days later, Willard will officially divorce his wife, Caroline. And on March 1st, 1864, he quits the U.S. Army.
Yep.
So she must have been triple jointed or something. I don't know how in the world she was able to pull all this off. Okay?
And they weren't married long after that. They were married long after that.
He comes back to Fairfax on March 10th, and Joseph and Antonia, they're going to be married in the Presbyterian Church on New York Avenue, followed by a very romantic honeymoon. Guess where?
At the Willard Hotel?
Nope.
Vermont.
Philadelphia.
Oh, wow.
The honeymoon capital of the world.
Yeah, I was looking to get back there last time we were there.
Yeah, no quit. So they're going to get married. They're going to honeymoon in Philly. But on May 1st of 1865, they're going to welcome their first child, Joseph. But sadly, this will be the only child that they're going to have that's going to survive. Yep. A second child, Charles, will die at 4 months of strep throat, and a third, Archie, will die at birth. It's also believed that Antonia had 2 miscarriages as well. She
actually had a lot of health problems from what I read about her. And she was today she probably would have like polycystic ovary syndrome, maybe something like that. But yeah, she had a tough time, carrying children. And just too, at the time, like child mortality rates were very high. One other quote I did find was, she was once asked why she married Willard. And she said, "I knew I could not revenge myself on the nation, but was fully capable of tormenting one Yankee to death, so I took the major." Well, he's going to get the last laugh in that one.
Well, yeah, no question. But what's going to happen, like I said before, is before she gives birth to Archie, this is the third one now, Joseph is going to have to write home to Antonia's father, Edward, to let him know that she was very sick. This is Antonia now. Now, this is February of 1871 while she's pregnant. Willard will send a carriage to bring Edward and her mother Julia to Washington to come see her now where they're living. Archie was born on February 9th, and he will die at childbirth. In less than a week later on Valentine's Day, February 14th of 71, Antonia is going to die of complications of childbirth. Some believe she died of a disease she caught at the old Capitol prison, but I'm not buying it. I mean, she had so many health problems anyway, but it's pretty clear that she obviously died of childbirth, but who knows? Who the hell knows?
And she's only 33 years old when she passes away.
Willard will never remarry, and he never got over her death, and his only outlet for grief was to focus on their son, Joseph. And just real quick on Joseph, their son, he'll attend VMI and become the wealthiest man in Virginia. He'll be the heir to the Willard Hotel money. He fought in the Spanish-American War and ironically served as an aide to former Confederate Fitzhugh Lee. Also, his daughter, Belle, the granddaughter of Joseph and Antonia, will marry Kermit Roosevelt, the son of Teddy Roosevelt.
Interesting.
There you go. Antonio is buried at Oak Hill Cemetery in Washington, in a star-studded cemetery that we have to go to.
Yes.
Samuel Carroll's buried there, Simon P. Chase, the original gravesite of Willie Lincoln, Jesse Reno, the original Rosewoods clown, Edwin Stanton, the great Cadmus Wilcox, believe it or not, is buried in Washington, D.C., and the Trent Affair captain, Charles Wilkes. But it's the story of Antonia's cousin Laura is also similar in so many ways.
I actually just have one more thing I wanted to say about Antonia, and that is that Stoughton is going to end up writing Mosby in 1867, and he requests that Antonia Ford be cleared of any involvement the night of that raid. And Mosby is said to have compiled because Stoughton's brother-in-law wrote a letter of recommendation for a political appointment that Mosby was seeking after the war. And Mosby is also said to have written a letter in 1900 that Ford was as innocent as Abraham Lincoln. Now, Mosby was a Confederate, so I think that could be taken either way, saying as innocent as Abraham Lincoln. But that was just a couple of things that I found. But as you said, moving on to Antonia Ford's cousin, Laura Ratcliffe, she led an interesting life as well. She was also born in Fairfax, Virginia on March 28th, 1836.
Oh, absolutely. And, we'll talk a little what's going on. They have parallel lives in a lot of different ways when you talk about Laura and you talk about Antonia. And like we were saying a bit ago, Jeb Stuart was in charge of the Confederate forces around Fairfax during, again, the Battle of Manassas, following that battle anyway. So on December 20th of 1861, a battle is going to occur when rebel forces and Union forces under Edward Ord are going to bump into each other because they're all looking for hay for their horses. 4,000 Confederates and 5,000 Union troops from Pennsylvania are going to fight at what will be known as the Battle of Drainesville, which resulted in the first time the Union troops won a battle in the East, by the way. There you go. Jeb's men retreated and took his wounded men to a church on Senegal Road called Frying Pan Church, which again is still there. You can go visit it. A boot 1.5 miles south of Frying Pan Church lived a 24-year-old woman named Laura Ratcliffe. And again, she is being a loyal Southern civilian. She volunteered her services as a nurse, and she tended to rebel wounded at Frying Pan Church, as well as back at Stuart's headquarters at Camp Qui-Vive. And Jeb is going to write about her in his memoirs, saying, quote, a local woman helped our doctors at Frying Pan Church. Of course, she's talking about Stuart.
Yeah.
Ratcliffe. From the first time Stuart met Ratcliffe, he was, quote, captivated by her beauty, helpfulness, and good nature.
Yeah, and he gave her several gifts in appreciation of her patriotism, admiration of her virtues, and pledge of his lasting esteem.
Certainly did. I think that A.B. Hill gives some gifts to people, too, that last their lifetime, too. But by 1860, Laura lived on Main Street with a relative named Margaret Farr and grew up poor thanks to her father, Richard Ratcliffe, who lost a family fortune betting on Cleveland Guardians playoff games. But it's a sad. I know, it's very sad.
Too soon.
Very sad.
No, I'm kidding.
But anyhow, growing up poor made Laura extremely independent. So when she felt her services were needed by Stuart after Drainesville, she volunteered without giving it a thought about that role of women we talked about. She's just going to roll her sleeves in and jump on in there. Jeb remained in the Fairfax area now until March of 62, when he moved towards Richmond, like we said earlier, as McClellan began his Peninsula campaign. And while in Fairfax, he and Laura became very, very close. Now, you hinted a few minutes ago. They began to write several letters back and forth, as he did with Antonia, admittedly, and who happily provided information about the Union troops at Frying Pan to Jeb back at his Camp Qui-Vive headquarters. Now, on June 30th of 1862, Jeb must have had plans to visit both Laura and Antonia, but canceled. He wrote, quote, my dear ladies, it is such a muddy day that I refrain from visiting you. I would dislike to appear in such an unpresentable a costume as the roads would give one. Yours, Jeb.
Diva much?
Oh, yeah. But he also has at least 4 letters that Stuart wrote directly to Laura that included poems. One started, quote, this is Jeb to Laura now. To Laura, we met once by chance, yet in that eventful chance, the mystic web of destiny was woven.
Jeez.
Obviously, Jeb was married to his wife Flora, who was with him at Camp Qui-Vive, but he certainly enjoyed women and flirting with them. There's no question. But again, there's a reason for it, because since flirting with young women usually meant that they become smitten with him, it would likely be able to pass on information about the Federal Army to him. You're gonna get it. You got a girl who has a crush on you.
But that's like that poem sounds like, it reminds me of Back to the Future with when what's his face, George goes up to the mom and he's like, you are my density.
Oh yeah,
that's exactly what it's like.
But the thing about Florida, she put up with it. She knew about it, and Jeb actually reminded her, not for nothing, but there are worse vices. I don't drink. I don't gamble. So I flirt with young women. So
I'm a fancy boy and don't like to get muddy.
Right? But this strategy certainly paid off with Laura and Antonia. In March of 1862, the Confederates pulled out of Northern Virginia to go south towards Richmond. And when Stuart left, you mentioned some gifts, he left an album. You know what it was?
It was poems.
No, Bon Jovi's "Slippery When Wet." No,
wow.
It was not poems. It was an album. Now, Laura, for obvious reasons, and it's an album like a book, like a photo album.
Oh yes, I just remembered what it is. Yeah.
Laura, for obvious reasons, she hid the book as federal troops were encamped near her house because they knew if they found it, she's going to get arrested. Her album was a blank book with a single printed page written to her by Stewart, and in it he wrote, quote, "To Miss Laura Ratcliffe, by a soldier friend as a token of his high appreciation of her patriotism, admiration of her virtues, and pledge of her lasting esteem." And you mentioned this a little while ago.
Yeah.
That was the first page of this album. Now, back in the day, when you went to visit somebody's house, you gave a calling card.
Yep.
And that's how it was. What Laura would do is she used this album as the calling card. So when visitors came to her house, they signed this book. And that's what happened. She ended up collecting 40 signatures in this book, including 28 Confederate soldiers and 15 civilians. Stewart obviously signed along with Fitzhugh Lee. Captain William Farley was a Confederate scout who would be killed at Brandy Station.
Mosby probably signed it.
And then Major, at that point, John Mosby, signed it. So when Stewart left, Mosby was a regular at the house, and he likely was probably in around Ratcliffe's house at least 12 times during the war. On December 29th of 1862, Mosby, Stewart, Fitzhugh Lee all wrote about being at Laura's house that day. And Laura wrote to Jeb, quote, "It's a shame you can't stay. It's hard on us living in conquered territory." And again, the Union picket line is just up the street of Frying Pan Church. Of course it was. This is when, again, we went back to, like we talked about Antonia, this is when Jeb wrote back that he was going to leave Mosby behind, and when the next day at the Ockham House, Mosby would officially get his partisan ranger command. So from that point on, Mosby and his rangers are going to patrol Fairfax. In February of 1863, the Union troops, who were already sick of Mosby's exploits, they're going to set a trap to kill or capture him. And when it was about to happen, Laura finds out about it, and she will literally save Mosby's life. What the Federals were planning on doing was basically they were going to bait and then ambush him. There's a crossroads not far away from Frying Pan that the Union troops knew that Mosby usually passed through. They were going to set up a small picket line, one that when Mosby saw, he couldn't help himself but to go capture them, because it was a small group. Once he approached them, there were going to be 200 additional Federal troops hiding in the woods, and they would ambush them and put an end to this whole gray ghost thing once for all. Here's what happens next, though, and how Laura finds out about it. The Union troops in the area knew that Laura was a Southern sympathizer, and they knew that she was friendly with Mosby. So the day before the ambush, a Union soldier is going to knock on her door, right? He's going to tell her of the Union plan that they're going to spring the next day, and he came to mock her. He said, quote, "I know you are friends with Mosby, but the next time you see him, he'll be either dead or captured." He goes on to tell her the whole plan because he doesn't think that she has enough time to go find him. Mm-hmm. And so even though she knew all the details, including the location and when it was going to go down, he didn't think twice about it. Laura and her sister are going to immediately begin to go look for Mosby. They're going to be knocking on doors of Southern civilians, asking if they knew where he was. Many of these civilians were also ones who signed Laura's album. So by chance, as they were looking for him, Mosby comes riding along, and Laura and her sister are going to go chase him down and let him know what was about to happen, but thus saving his life. So Mosby now is pissed. So as a way to stick it to the Federals, he's going to ride in the other direction to a Federal sutler station in Herndon, and he's going to rob them blind.
That's amazing.
Now, Laura was a very trusted person to Mosby, and in 1863 began to leave correspondence as well as money for him, but they needed a place to hide it.
Is this the Rock?
This is the Rock, okay? Laura suggested a meeting place where she could leave these materials for him and suggested a rock not far from her house near Frying Pan in McNair, Virginia, which is not far from the modern-day Dulles Airport. Mm-hmm. Mosby used this rock to pick up materials from Laura, but also as a place for Mosby and his men to rendezvous, as a meeting place. So Mosby's rock is still there, and it can be found behind a housing development called McNair Farms and behind the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. But after the war, Laura is going to be poor, and her house is falling apart. So in 1869, her mother bought a house on 2346 Centerville Road in Herndon, an 18-acre property that she called Brookside. You know why?
Because it was beside a brook.
You got it. People aren't too creative. It's called Marybrook today. And this is the house that Laura is going to live in for the rest of her life. Fast forward to 1890. Laura is 54 years old now. On December 4th of that year, she will marry her next-door neighbor, a man named Milton Hanna, at the St. James Hotel in Washington. And again, by now, Laura's mother and sister are both dead. So suddenly, the poor Laura finds herself into some money because her husband is a rich New Yorker.
He's a wealthy Union veteran.
And it's funny if you think about it. It's ironic that both Laura Ratcliffe and Antonia Ford, who are both deep secessionists, both married Union soldiers. It's one of those funny things.
And he ends up 7 years after their marriage getting killed in an unfortunate farming accident, which I don't know what that means.
I do. You know what happened?
What happens to him?
He was out working the yard at his house, and a tree fell on him and killed him. Yard work will kill you, okay? And that's what happens. So Laura's now will suddenly become a widow, but inherited his 200-acre property. So she'll never have to worry about money again. She's rich for the rest of her life. In 1910, Mosby's men will hold a reunion at the house of Mr. J.J. Darlington in Herndon, Virginia. And during one of their speeches, one of Mosby's men describes Laura's help in the war. He described her as, quote, a venerable woman who gave valuable information to the movements of federal troops. Okay. 4 years later, Laura is 78 years old and living in her Brookside home as a retiree, feeding her chickens, yelling at the neighbors, typical retirees, right? She's going to walk out her front door on these footstone things, and she's going to slip and fall, and she's going to break her hip.
She's 78 years old when that happens.
A doctor arrives. She refused the doctor's help. You know why? Because he's a man.
Yeah.
You ain't putting your hands on me, right? So she's going to spend the final 9 years of her life in her home with a broken hip. Laura's going to die on August 2nd of 1923 at age 87 of a cerebral hemorrhage. It will be found in her bed the next day. And she was immediately remembered as a Confederate heroine.
Yeah, and visitors to her described her as being gracious, and apparently she wore like little earrings all the time. But people said she remained cheerful and interested in her community. She was also, when she passed away, like she had been a very private woman, and she never really received like a lot of recognition for what she did. And when she did die, she was laid out by the front window so that those who knew her could pay their respects. And that was a common practice in the Victorian era as well, as you would commonly have the person like laid out in the living room or by the front window so people could come and pay their respects and see them one final time.
Yeah. She'll be buried at Ratcliffe, Coleman, and Hannah Cemetery on Centerville Road in Herndon, which is a fenced-in area directly in front of the Marriott Suites Hotel.
Yep.
Imagine that. But in her, what's so funny was that album we talked about.
Yeah.
I went this rabbit. I wanted to find what happened in the album, and I found out what happened. In her will, she made sure that her autographed album that Jeb Stuart gave her was passed on to her cousin, a woman named Mamie Wiley. When Wiley died in 1953, it was in her family's possession, but at some point they must have sold it, and a private collector, I guess, has it now. So it's out of the
can you
family.
imagine finding that in the attic?
That'd be pretty cool. But like her cousin Antonia, Laura did what she did out of pure patriotism. By doing so, she like we said, she stepped away from that traditional role of that Victorian era. Laura was never arrested because, unlike Antonia, two things: she kept her mouth shut.
Yeah, she's very private,
and she never showed anybody that album.
No,
because if she did, she knew that it was a sure trip to the old Capitol prison. So she kept that quiet basically till the end of her life.
And I wonder if she learned that from like seeing what happened to her cousin, but maybe not. Like it sounds like, the two of them are cousins, but Antonia seems more like the gossipy one, the one that would brag about what she's doing. And whereas Laura seems like just the more private one, where she's out doing this stuff and not really talking about it. And that's probably why there's not too much information about her and exactly what she did during the war.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at some of the spies, the Bell Boys, the Rose Greenhouse of the world, I mean, those are more traditional spies. Laura Ratcliffe and Antonia Ford are more observers in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
They saw what they saw and they reported it. I mean, Antonia did a little more espionage than Laura did.
And I think they were also too. They're friends with these guys as well, and because they're both Confederates, they feel this. I think it's his loyalty to them to help them out because, Mosby is seen as a protector in that area once he's given that permission by Jeb to do the partisan thing, that he sees himself as, not just protecting the citizens in the area, but he is going to become a thorn in the side of the Union Army.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, in both Laura and Antonia are going to become the instrumental in passing intelligence to Mosby and Stewart. And in Mosby's case, specifically for Laura Ratcliffe, it's literally saved his life. So both Antonia Ford and Laura Ratcliffe's memories live today because they capture the imagination of young women risking their lives for that cause they believed in during the worst of times. And like we said before, though overshadowed by, like we said, the Boyds and the Greenoughs of the world, it's unfair to say that the legend of John Mosby would not be what it is today in Fairfax County if not for Antonia and Laura. So I think it's important to tell their story and for people who know. If you're in the Fairfax area, you know these women.
Yeah.
But I think they fall under that radar because they're very specific to a location. They don't travel to Washington.
No.
But what they do is they're able to keep that Fairfax area, which is Union controlled, always on the edge, especially when Jeb left in March of 62. When Mosby took over.
Yeah.
Because like I said before, the legend of John Mosby does not exist if it is not for Ford.
Yep.
And it does not exist if not for Laura. Because for one, he doesn't get Stoughton without Antonia.
Yeah.
He doesn't probably live if it isn't for Laura. So if you're a Mosby person and you appreciate studying his exploits right up to the end of the war, it does not happen without these two women. So it's important to study them and understand these people who tell the story in different ways and really help that build the character of someone like Jeb, and especially specific like Mosby.
Yep, I completely agree. They're two very fascinating women. Unfortunately, there's not as much on them as some of the other female spies, but they are worth studying. And yeah, if you find yourself in Fairfax, you can go see some of the places where they were as well.
If you go to Fairfax Courthouse, you can visit the Ford House like you mentioned before.
Yep.
And you can go visit that. Laura's house is gone. We did go to look for it.
Yep.
With our friend John, and it's basically a housing development now.
Yeah.
But he studies this stuff really, really well, and he's really up to speed on Mosby. So he's one of our gurus on Mosby. So he showed us pretty much what Laura's house was, and so we did visit Laura's gravestone.
Yep.
And we do owe Antonia a visit.
Yes,
up
we
in
do.
Washington next time we go. So I guess we can probably drop the story here. I think it's a good one. Because you can just imagine this. This is one of those stories, unlike battles, unlike talking about generals, you can put yourself in a situation of these people and understand their true plight of what it's like to look out the window, see your town being occupied by what you consider an enemy government, and still trying to find a way, risking your own life and limb to find a way to get out of this and save the people that you care about.
Yep.
So what's coming up for us next?
So we are going to be recording our Halloween episode soon, the 6th annual Halloween Spectacular with our friend Jay Price. So we will be recording that in a few weeks and dropping it as well. And we've got some other episode ideas in the pipeline as well, which we will be letting y'all know about soon. If you are listening to this tomorrow, so October 4th, we will be doing our YouTube live stream at 10 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, October 5th. So we hope you can join us for that as well.
Yep, this episode will drop later on today. So hopefully we'll see you on Sunday. We got some shenanigans afoot for us coming up here pretty soon. So we will be doing a round table here shortly. We'll be scheduling that here pretty soon. So fall's in the air. There's a nip in the air. So
pumpkin beers
pumpkin
out
beer.
there.
Everything's going on. It's all happening. It's all pumpkin here. All right, Mary, what's final words from you, Finchero?
Well, thank you for bringing it like you always do. Thank you for our listeners to listening to us and supporting us for these last 156 episodes. We could not do it without you, and I could not do this without you, Darren.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, we'll talk to you all soon, and we'll see you all on the other side.
See y'all later.
Peace out.